Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're working out some technical bobbles, but we're going to go ahead and get started and welcome you to our virtual lecture this evening. My name is Susan Bowdoin. I am the Digital Outreach Coordinator for the Archaeological Conservancy, and I am very pleased to welcome you tonight. Tonight wraps up a series of lectures and virtual tours that we've been doing that have been sponsored partially by the New Mexico Humanities Council, and we want to thank them for their support of us in getting these projects finished. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the new premiere that I hope that you have all had the chance to view. We have a brand new virtual tour that takes you to two of our new properties at Mesa Prieta, and you're going to be hearing about those tonight and getting a behind the scenes view of those. Before we get started, a couple of technical reminders. Please use the Q&A for questions. You should find that Q&A button down at the bottom. We'll be collecting those throughout the evening, and then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. Right now, our Facebook stream is not running. I'm hoping to get that up in the next few minutes. If not, we'll be posting the recording to Facebook soon after we are finished tonight. And we also will be posting it to our YouTube channel. I know that many of you like to share that out with your friends and family. Please do that. So tonight, I am thrilled to bring to you the living landscape of Mesa Prieta. This is a project that has been about this amazing place in northern New Mexico. Mesa Prieta is a very long, flat-top mountain that is a mesa caused, well, you heard in the film what it was caused from, a volcanic rift, layer of basalt, and we have some amazing petroglyphs and other cultural features on the mesa. Joining me tonight are some of the people that were part of the video creation. You're going to be talking with Matthew Martinez tonight. He is the executive director of the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph project. We also have Chester Liwosz. He is a project archaeologist for the Petroglyph project. John Kinchlow is our site steward. He's not able to be with us tonight, but he was in the film. So if you watched, you already met him. Down on the bottom, we've got April Brown. She's actually going to kick us off tonight. She is our Southwest Regional Director and is going to be talking to you a little bit about the work that the Conservancy does on these properties at Mesa Prieta. Mandy Woods is also going to be with us, and she's going to be helping me on the back end with some of our technical things and gathering your questions so that we can get those answered. And Sarah Weber, our Special Projects Director, is also with us helping on the back end. And then I'm over here on the right-hand side. So we are all thrilled that you're here with us. Thank you for joining us. April, I think I'm going to let you take it over from me. Let me unshare so that you can grab it, and it is all yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen there. Just do. Yeah. So I think the film did a really great job of emphasizing just how special and significant these sites really are. And petroglyphs are a fragile and finite resource. Once they're gone forever. And the preserves that we manage today would not exist if not for the care of the former landowners. So I'd like to take a moment and just thank Catherine Wells, Debbie Boss, and Doris and Arsenio Martinez for their dedication to preserving these incredible sites. And here's a photo of me and Arsenio last summer enjoying the view from his property at the top of Mesa Prieta, and you can see just what a spectacular view that is. And these landowners spent decades protecting these sites, and passing that along to another entity is something they're not taking lightly, and for good reasons. We can spend months or years negotiating the terms of an acquisition project, and for me, it's important to listen and connect with the landowners to understand their vision for the property so that we can carry that on. It's a big responsibility, and we are honored that they chose us to continue their legacy. And the acquisition process for us is more than a business transaction. It involves building relationships that continue well beyond the closing process. And property acquisition is only the beginning. The real work begins after acquisition. And now we need to make sure that these properties are properly secured, monitored, and documented. We do this with the help of site stewards and with the help of Mesa Prieta Petroglyph project, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a bit. But first, I thought I would take a moment and share more about the work that's necessary to manage these properties and just some of the challenges that we face. And so in one of our most recent lectures, Mandy Woods, my assistant, she shared this slide, and I think it's a great overview of some of the actions that are necessary after the acquisition process takes place. And, we usually start with some kind of funding so that we can fund the rest of things that we need to implement, like fencing, and posting of signs and so on and so forth. But each preserve comes with its own unique challenges and needs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the challenges that we face with our two newest preserves. So you may have noticed in the film, there are major roads along both of these new preserves at Mesa Prieta. And this is a photo looking west from Sagrada Jardín. This is the parking lot here. You can kind of, let me get my pointer here. So you can see the parking lot down here in this corner, and here's a major road that runs right along the property. And here's another view from the hillside with a car. You can see the car on the road visible in the background here, right here. And so fencing and posting the appropriate signs, of course, are a top priority at these properties. And this is something that we're actively doing now at both Cottonwood and Sagrada. The greatest threats that we face at Sagrada are vandalism, looting, and trespassing. Because of its proximity to the road, it's well known to locals. It's visible sometimes, some of it's visible from the road. We found trash and past evidence of vandalism and looting at the preserve. And you saw some examples of that in the film with the bullet holes and the chipping away of panels from some of the bigger boulders. And this site's going to require increased monitoring that will include digital surveillance and additional site stewards. We're in the process of assigning multiple site stewards for extra coverage at this particular property. And we'll be placing game cameras in the area to keep up with some of the activity that's happening there. And we will also be repairing the western fence near this parking lot you see here to include new stays, new barbed wire, a gate for entry that's locked, just to better secure the site. So site monitoring is a very important aspect of protecting these sites. So assigning site stewards is also a top priority. As you saw in the film, Cottonwood Preserve is diligently monitored by John Kinchelow. Nothing happens there without him, without us knowing, and we honestly could not be more grateful. Not only does he check on the site regularly, he helps us maintain good relationships with our neighbors, and he helps us monitor any work or activity that might threaten some of these boulders. He is truly a frontline soldier in our fight for preservation at Mesa Prieta. And I just want to take a moment and thank John for all of his hard work there. We wouldn't even know about this site if it wasn't for John. He's the one who brought it to our attention back in December of 2022, and he connected us with the landowner, and we're so grateful we had the opportunity to save this special site. So one of the challenges at this particular site is that there's an active acequia that runs along the eastern boundary of the property. And this acequia dates back to the 1700s, and it's a lifeline to the surrounding agricultural properties along the Rio Grande here. These ditches require regular maintenance to keep them free of debris and the water flowing. Unfortunately, this ditch runs just beneath petroglyph boulders, and the maintenance comes dangerously close each year to undercutting or damaging these boulders. So earlier this year, just maybe a couple of months ago, John alerted us that maintenance was about to begin. So with the help of Matthew from the Petroglyph project, we reached out to the people in charge of the work there to discuss our concerns. And so we all met at the site, talked through the issues, and agreed upon a plan that included not only avoiding the large petroglyph boulders, but also an attempt to stabilize some of them. And so you can see right over here, this is our property on the other side. Here's the drainage, the agricultural ditch here. Here's our property here, and there's the big cottonwood tree that the property is named from. And you can see each year in the past, they have dug into our side of the property. They've placed soil on our side of the property. And that was something that we addressed while we were there. So this year, they're doing their best to avoid all of that. And so here's a view of the boulder in question that we were trying to make sure was not damaged or disturbed. And this boulder isn't actually on our side of the property. It's just over the boundary line, but it's still threatened and it's part of the larger cultural site. So we're still we're very, we find it very important to try to make sure that this boulder's saved. You can see down here, the ditch runs right along the other side, right along here. You can see this little chip here where it's been undercut before in past ditch cleanings, and the exposed. You can see this lighter color of the boulder here, which was once buried in the ground that's now been exposed because of the ditch and the cleaning. So it's very important that we keep our eye on this. And work began here about 2 weeks ago. And we luckily receive regular updates from Bill Hargraves, who supervises the maintenance here at the ditch. And he's a local resident and he cares about protecting these petroglyphs. He's been wonderful to work with and he keeps us informed at every step of the way. So thank you, Bill. John Kinchelow has also been keeping an eye, very close eye on this project. So everything is going well so far, and they hope to have it completed in 4 to 6 weeks. But just because they're finished this year doesn't mean that it's over. Requires yearly maintenance, so it's going to be an ongoing issue that we'll have to monitor. So as you can see, it takes a community to preserve these sites, and Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project plays an important role in the management, documentation, and the educational components of these sites. Their documentation efforts have not only led us to acquire sites, but they've helped us locate and identify petroglyphs that may have been threatened or damaged by utility work on the mesa. They lead educational tours and operate an annual youth group program that teaches young people how to identify and record petroglyphs at Mesa Prieta. So we couldn't do it without them. So thank you so much, Matthew and Chester, for everything you do and the project does for us. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chester, who's going to tell you more about the project and the digital modeling efforts there at Mesa Prieta.
Thank you, April. So yeah, one of the things that we can do is 3D model some of these petroglyph panels. It's a fairly quick process in the field, but the amount of time that it takes does add up, and especially on the back end when we're doing the data processing on the computer, but especially if a panel is particularly interesting, or in the examples I'm going to show you, if the panel has been impacted, then we can use this as a preservation tool. So I'm going to share my screen here, and you'll probably recognize this panel from the film. This is the Avanu that was knocked off of a larger panel and someone attempted to steal it. So this 3D model is made just from photographs, and we did this without disturbing this in any way. We really can just walk around it to make this 3D model. Of course, that's limiting, right? We wouldn't be able to see something that's under the ground, but in this case, we can see all the details of the shape of this stone, and then compare that to the panel that we believe it came from, and really be able to see how the shapes on this rock, and in fact, we can look at this flat area here and this little bulb here, and then, oh, yeah, no, there we go. And then compare that to the shapes of this boulder here, where we believe it came from, and we'll see that there's that flat line, there's that little bulb. So we can actually digitally start to refit these together. And that's actually where this, I'm having a little trouble with my cursor here, but this is where that Avanu came off of, and we can see how it refits in there. So we would be able to stitch these back together. This also, if we look at this panel, zoom out, there we go. You can see that there are petroglyphs here on this face, and even here at the top. So this is another reason why we use the 3D models, is to get that real 3D spatial relationship that's hard to capture in a single still photograph. That's all I really had on that, but feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A about the process for making these 3D models or how else we use them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Great. Thank you, Chester, for the work on visually piecing that together. I can say when I first saw this slab of rock, this basalt removed, and then finding it down below is like, we were able to backtrack of where this might have been and the piece that it came from, and so is quite emotional and daunting to think about the destruction and the vandalism. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the symbolism and the avenue, particularly is a central figure in our Tewa cosmologies. And up at Mesa Prieta, it's one of the most pronounced images that we've recorded and we've documented in several manifestations. Generally, it is a significant deity that represents fertility. It's a blessing. It's a symbol that mimics the body of the Rio Grande and the movement. A lot of our dances and traditional activities involve lightning sticks. So whenever there's lightning, rain follows. So it's really in relationship. And to sever an image of this avenue from its original place where it was etched has consequences. When you think about blocking energies, blocking particular connections to landscapes, and much like removing a book from an encyclopedia connection, if you remember from growing up, your encyclopedia connections and your spaces of that, but it really just rips up that larger connection to how we think about place. Up at Mesa Prieta, we very much approach the use of landscape as all contiguous. I know there's land that is formerly owned by the Archaeological Conservancy, there's private land ownership, there's BLM, there's tribal land. Much like New Mexico history and really throughout the United States, there's a patchwork, there's a checkerboard of jurisdiction. And that's often a challenge in how we think about getting out the notion and what it means to be a good steward. So despite who the owner is, we want things protected and preserved. We recognize from a project that the decisions we make today are going to impact future generations. So it's not something that we take very lightly when we see vandalism and any other type of destruction there. So our project, Mesa Prieta, which is a Spanish word, and that's literally a descriptive word of this black mountain, this black landscape, because of the basalt rock that cooled. In Tewa, we refer to the place as Tsinkwaya, and Tsi is a very common term and terminology because of a general reference to the flat mesas, the flat landscapes. And you see that throughout New Mexico and throughout the Southwest, these flat landscapes and connections and relationships to the larger Rio Grande corridor. And so it's much more than our understandings of images of that are pecked on rocks, but it's in relationship to water resources, to mountain peaks, and all the ecological systems that bring that life. One thing I enjoyed about the film too is just the sounds and the sandhill cranes, and the higher up you go, you see a good reminder of whose landscape that we're on, not only as from a human perspective, but that this is older than old, and these geological histories and formations are for millennia, right, and beyond that, millions of years old. And so it really puts in perspective who we are as people on this earth. And I love that the film beautifully conveyed some great drone footage and landscape, so you get a good sense of that. It's nothing like experiencing it in person. And again, really championing the work that we do as a project, but also the due diligence and the work that needs to be done to honor all those that came before and what's ahead. You want to pass this back and forth, or what are we doing?
I think we could certainly do that. And thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Chester. Thank you, April. This really is an extraordinary place. And Matthew, I see your face light up when you talk about the importance and the significance to you and to others of that place. One of the questions that's come up, April, was directed to you about the ditch at the base of Cottonwood, and whether that is a more recent typical ditch dug as part of the road going in, or does it have more historical impact going back to the Spanish area? Can you speak a little bit more to that to clarify that?
Yeah, I can do it. I don't know exact dates, but I do know that the acequia there dates back to the 1700s. It's a historical, probably, you know, I'm sure, I don't, Matthew, do you happen to know like the dates or anything? I just remember them saying that it was the 1700s. The ditch has been there probably, I mean, I'm assuming that that road was probably once a trail before it was a road, and it's been developed over the years. So the ditch was probably there before the current concrete, you know, the paved road, I should say. And, you know, it could have changed over the years, but most of those acequias there are not changed. They're simply maintained and redug because they've been where they've been for hundreds of years. So yeah, it's something that when we bought the property, we definitely knew it was going to be a challenge. We had seen where they had been undercutting and throwing some dirt on our side before, but I feel really hopeful with all the communications that, you know, that we and Matthew have been able to have with the people working there, that we can proceed with caution and everybody's on the same page as far as protecting the resources there. So.
Matthew, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it's estimated that that whole acequia system as it stands was probably developed around the 1700s. And so there's several generations that have, you know, very much actively engaged in cleaning, agricultural activities. And it follows this windy road, which is now paved. And historically, it might have been a trail because it's a good connector to other villages along that site. But that is where the Denver Rio Grande Railroad cut through in the late 1800s. So it's below that is an old railroad track, and people refer to it as the chili line because they brought chili and potatoes from southern Colorado. Again, very much connecting this larger agricultural corridor. So, you know, this whole region has been subjected to many types of travel and impacts throughout generations. So it's a really rich layered history in northern New Mexico.
Thank you for both of you. Another question that has come up is actually one that I asked when we were climbing around all of the basalt boulders, and I may have been Chester that I asked, it may have been Matthew, I don't remember for sure. But we've got a question of in the summer and spring and fall when it's warmer, is it a really snaky place?
I think there's definitely snakes up there. I don't know if it's like snakier, but
yeah, and most of the snakes that we have up there seem to be pretty harmless. We've only had probably as many rattler sightings as I can count on one hand over the last 10 plus years. So you get like garter snakes, bull snakes. Yeah, they've never really bothered me. I remember actually my first year with summer youth that some of the students, after our safety briefing that morning, where I told them avoid snakes, they ended up cornering a garter snake under a tree. The poor thing. Oh, it was okay. They ended up leaving it alone after that. So yeah, you'll see snakes up there. They're friendly. They mind their own business.
and perhaps he's asking that because we keep showing these horned serpent petroglyphs at these sites. And I think Matthew touched on that. I mean, there's a lot of There's a relationship between these images and water sometimes too, which, you know, I don't know how much water is actually at Mesa Prieta, but these images seem to be found along drainages in places where maybe there could have been springs or something at some point, or check dams or some kind of reservoirs or something.
Yeah, and also it's believed that eels would live in the Rio Grande before it was dammed. That they would probably be living out in the ocean and migrate up, probably during some kind of spawning activity. So were not just snakes on the ground, but there were also serpent-like things in the water too. And April, that was a really great point that you just brought up, that we see these images in concert with things like irrigation features for fields, or just around the edges of the fields. So they seem the horned serpent does seem to have a lot of meanings, and one of those associations is with agriculture, both in the control of water, as well as a blessing for the fields. Matthew, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and so there's an interesting narrative about Southwest indigenous peoples living in this harsh drought climate, and almost just kind of borderline on this Sahara Desert narrative, right? It's nothing like that. And we know just from this region that it's lush, it's abundant. People settled along the river, along the Rio Grande, because it was, once overflowing. And obviously over time it's shortened, and by the time that gets down to El Paso area, it's more of a ditch, if even that. So that says something about climate change and everything that has happened in modern times. But there's a reason why people settled, why there's a lot of reverence for fertility symbols, larger subsistence, and that includes symbols and evidence of grinding slicks, of rock check dams. I mean, the list goes on of how indigenous peoples really had this, larger relationship, and still do, to particular landscapes. And the place is very conducive to this larger agricultural features. Not only us as humans, but we have a small herd of elk and deer that cross the corridor of the mesa. Some of the trails, it's not uncommon to see elk droppings in the area. And then you turn around, there's an elaborate elk panel or deer panel. And when those moments come together, it's you get it, right? There's some synergy around how this place is very special, and what people, pecked around them to revere that.
So Matthew, I'm going to, I guess, tag on a little bit. There's another question that showed up that's wanting to know about like a listing of all the designs that we see in the petroglyphs and all of their meanings to that. I think you've touched a little bit on that, but maybe a little more elaboration of, what do we know about the different types of petroglyphs and the meanings and significances of them?
Well, I firmly believe is, the more we know, the more we don't know, right? There's a lot to unpack. And I'm always careful about explaining things, because we're in our 2024 modern lens, interpreting images from hundreds, possibly thousands of years ago, right? So there's a very different worldview that's operating from those that peck these particular images. We're used to reading panels and really texts from left to right on a flat surface. There's all these ways of how we read books and signage, and these visual narratives. We got to think about not only the images, but the larger landscape context and all its surrounding is just as important of these particular avenue, the snake images, the shields, the bear tracks, the turkey tracks, the the eagle imagery, what we might interpret as eagle. There's questions, and Chester's done some great work unpacking, are they, could they possibly be macaw images, and some of those influences from Mesoamerican cultures, which we know there was an elaborate trade network across the Americas. So it's one of those things, like I said, that the more we begin to look and document and study these, the more questions that that they lead us to. And we can see, a series of patterns in pottery and ceramics and weavings and all these different artistic traditions that still resonate today. And indigenous people have those larger connections of these meanings, and how they continue to be manifested. They're not just part of the past, but when you experience them up close and include them in your art forms and traditions, they become alive and ever continuous.
Yeah. Thank you for elaborating on that.
And can I jump in on the archaeological side of that?
Please do.
So yeah, we have a system that we use for classifying petroglyphs that's based off of the Archaeological Society of New Mexico's Rock Art Council. And that comes with a sort of pre-established list of motifs that are then grouped into these larger categories of anthropomorphs, animals, etc. And that's really just kind of the beginning of study. Now, not everything fits nicely into there, but I feel like the more that you become familiar with the images and the more that you realize that a particular petroglyph can be a little bit of two different motifs, then you start to be able to describe these things in a consistent and useful way. And then we can look at this at the landscape scale. We of course track the locations of all of these, so we can look at how these different design motifs, how those are distributed on the landscape and what they're associated with. So Matthew mentioned my work with macaw images, and yeah, we found some very interesting associations with macaws. We saw that the macaw images tend to occur near agricultural fields. They tend to occur near rock surfaces that are going to reflect sound very strongly. They tend to occur near flute player images. And so we can start to get a sense of some of the many meanings that that images of macaws can carry by these sorts of archaeological associations as well. And so that's the angle that I like to take on it. Of course, I like to do this informed by an understanding of Tewa culture, but I'm also coming at this as an outsider. So in order to not overextend the assumptions I make, I like to back things up from this sort of geospatial and statistical way. And we've got more studies in the hopper for that, right, Matthew?
So if you participants were able to watch the video before you're coming and joining us for the talk, you saw some video real time of Chester actually using a tablet. When we were out climbing the rocks and taking the raw video to put the film together, we actually came across a couple of things that had not been recorded. And so that's what Chester's referring to, and seeing that process was really fun. And it's amazing to see what data looks like on that tablet and all of the different layers stacked up and things. It's good work that you guys are doing. It's really very interesting.
And I swear that wasn't staged. Oh, sorry.
I really want to tag on to that, because we've had issues before, even this year, where there was questionably some boulders damaged due to utility work. Mm-hmm. And if it hadn't been for the fact that they had documented those petroglyphs the way that they had, we would not maybe have known what was damaged. And we were able to walk out to the site, pinpoint the location. Chester came out with his tablet, and we were able to see where they were supposed to be and where they were now. And otherwise, we would never have had that much detail to know. I mean, if we wanted to put them back, we probably could. but at least we knew where to find them and what was on them and what to be looking for. So their work is super important to maintenance, making sure that these, in order to protect them, we have to know where they are and what they are, and they have definitely done just a spectacular job of documenting everything across the Mesa, not just on our properties, but just everywhere. And that's going to be really important in the future, because even if they, God forbid something happens to them during some utility work or something, road maintenance, whatever it is, we at least have a digital resource. We know what they look like. We know that they were there, and we know what they were, where they were in relation to other petroglyphs, which is so important. So you guys are awesome.
Well, I love how things are just kind of dovetailing together. One of the other questions that I predicted we would have actually did come up, and we've got some folks that are interested in knowing about touring Mesa Prieta, and are there opportunities for people to actually go like we did and be on the ground and experience what it means?
So
Yes,
go ahead, Matthew. Yes.
you can book a tour on our website, mesaprietapetroglyphs.org, and schedule a tour accordingly. And Sandy, our tour coordinator, and or one of our docents would be coordinating that with you all too. April, I know there's questions about the current property, right? The recent acquisition. You want to speak to on that?
Yeah, the new properties are going to take a little bit of work to make them into, we have done very limited tours with members up at Cottonwood recently, just out of request. They called. I was like, the caveat is that it's, there's no trail, there's loose rock, and it's a little hot in the summer. But Cottonwood's a very doable property as far as tours are concerned. It's fairly easy to get around. It's small, and you can see a lot in a small amount of time. Sagrada is we could do tours there too. These are not for the faint of heart. You're going to be climbing up and down a lot of boulders on a lot of loose rock. The inherent dangers are, breaking an ankle or meeting a snake. But we'll definitely we'll schedule limited tours by request. And in the future, we would like to schedule group tours, maybe at least once a year through the Conservancy, where we can take people up to these sites and maybe do a picnic day and teach you about, have Chester or Matthew or whoever up there to help us learn, to learn more about the petroglyphs in real time. So that's coming. But if you do want a tour of the newer petroglyph sites, please just reach out to me. And Matthew's really good about doing tours even at some of these sites too. So we can work with the project and help get you a guide up there. So.
Another question for, I don't know, this could be any one of the three of you. So whoever wants to jump in, could one of you talk, or more of you talk about the Pueblo people who made the petroglyph images? Was there a village nearby, more than one village? In the video, we did talk about the 3 different types of petroglyphs that are found on Mesa Prieta. So anybody want to jump in and tackle that one?
That's a Chester and Matthew question, so I'm going to let them answer it.
Yeah, I can start on that. There were pueblos all along the foot of the mesa. Yunque would have been the closest one to Sagrada. The closest ones to Cottonwood would be Fioge and Saishu. And of course, there's Owenge, which was around then and is still around now. And we should keep in mind that folks from Fioge, Saishu, Yunge have descendants in Owenge today. And I think it's important, I probably mentioned this in the film too, I think it's important to understand that while there might be multiple settlements, multiple villages, is that these still constitute just a part of one Tewa community, and that we shouldn't chop up the mesa. Oh, this was connected to this pueblo. This is connected to this pueblo. It was all Tewa. And it's important to remember that, because when we start to chop things up, we start to undermine tribal rights in the present, and that can be deeply problematic. So yeah, obviously there are those pueblos, and then on the other side, on the Ojo Caliente side, there was Posiawinge and a couple of others. So really, if you saw the shape of the mesa like this, and all around that, there were pueblos.
Thanks.
And we know that people did not live on the mesa, no traditional village structures, so to speak. It was always in relationship to the mesa, where they just, right across the river or the larger corridor where you mentioned where these villages, are around that entire site. They're always in relationship. So actually not on the mesa is what we understand. There was no people living on site. They traveled to it and visited for several reasons and different agricultural activities.
And I'll just say that no matter what site you're at in that valley, no matter what side you're on, you can see Mesa Prieta. It's a formidable feature on the landscape.
Mhm.
And we have some village sites, some biscuitware village sites along the Chama. And from those sites, Mesa Prieta is visible. You can just point at it and go, there it is. So I think there's significance in that feature is visible from every direction.
Yeah, and jumping on that, likewise, every direction is visible from the mesa, and so when you stand, not even on the top, just high up on it, you begin to see yourself situated almost in the center of the Tewa world, with the sacred cardinal direction mountains all visible, and so it's really a place to orient from. And one of the paradoxes of the mesa, like Matthew said, is we don't really think that people were living on the mesa, but they're certainly using it as a part of their daily lives. They're certainly crossing it, and they're certainly orienting themselves in their world from this spot. So that's one of the really cool things about it.
Thank you. Chester, this is one for you. What type of camera and software are you using to capture the 3D models?
So I have a DSLR. It's Canon Rebel EOS, an early generation one. I had been using a Panasonic Lumix before that, so just kind of a slightly above entry DSLR. The software, there's a commercial program called Agisoft Metashape. That one's really good. Recently, there's a open source photogrammetry software that'll also produce models from these photographs, and that's called Meshroom. And I'm looking over here because on my other screen, I actually have one of our petroglyph boulders up in Meshroom right now, as I'm preparing another 3D model. So yeah, you can just use your smartphone as the camera, and I believe some of the iPhones even have LiDAR on them. So we recently met with a researcher and high school educator who's developing a curriculum on using the LiDAR that's built into some of the Apple devices to make models of at least one surface on certain petroglyph boulders. So there are absolutely a lot of options, and as technology continues to advance, it becomes more readily accessible. So I think even my method of using the DSLR and then building the model on the computer is it's kind of old news now, but it's a method that I'm familiar and comfortable with, and gives me a lot of power to tweak the models. But there's also, and I have to unlock my phone to look at it. So I have an Android phone, and the 3D modeling app that I have on here is called Curie Engine. So, like I said, if you have an iOS device, there are built-in programs on there for Android. Curie Engine is one of the options. And then if you want to do the model after the fact, built on your computer, there's Agisoft Metashape and there's Meshroom.
Thanks, Chester. All right, a few more questions have rolled in. Besides educational outreach, how do we discourage vandalism at the sites? Are we patrolling? Are we using drones? That kind of stuff. April, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, because that is a challenge, but as I said earlier, we are going to increase monitoring specifically at Sagrada because we do know that there's trespassing there. And also securing the fences, keeping a check on those fences. Drones really aren't an option because someone has to operate them. That means someone has to be there all the time. But we are going to put some game cameras up there just to get a feel for what kind of activity is happening so that we know how to address it. I think also education is super important. As we acquire these properties, I think that we need to do a lot of community outreach to let people know, why we're protecting them, how important they are, and, why we discourage their visiting without us being there. But it's always a challenge at all of the sites. But I can say that, most of the time we can keep it in check just with site monitors and posting signs and just keeping an eye out. And sometimes just patrolling Facebook as well, because sometimes I see people on Facebook posting pictures of some of our areas. So that gives me the opportunity to reach out to specific people and let them know that that's not cool. So there's a variety of ways, but we're definitely going to be putting some surveillance up there to see what we can do. And, the site stewards all live in the area, which is a benefit for us because it's easy for them to drop by at a moment's notice and just check on it. John Kinchelow drives by Cottonwood every day. He lives up there. So like Cottonwood's, very secure. But in a nutshell, we're just going to do our best and keep a watch out. And I think education is also key. So.
Absolutely. And that starts with sharing what we've shared so far.
Yeah, the video helps with that too. So
absolutely. Another one that says, sorry, this was briefly mentioned previously, but what role will the property's previous owners take with regard to the property in the future? So do we have any property owners that want to stay connected to their properties and part of that preservation process?
I would say yes. Aside from some people aren't here, so they're not going to be directly involved in the property. But in the instance of like Arsenio and his family still lives there. Arsenio and Doris still live in the area. So I definitely stay in touch with them. And, in the process of acquisition, we discussed what their visions were and talked about, allowing them to be site stewards, allowing their family to have access to the site still, since they spent so much time preserving it. We definitely work with the landowners well beyond that into the future so that they can still have a connection to these sites. They've built a connection. It's important for some of these people to maintain them. And, aside from that, we have many sites where the people that donated or sold the property still live next door. So they are the site stewards. So sometimes the landowners remain connected to the property through site stewardship and just because they're neighbors. So just because they sell it to us doesn't mean it's gone forever for them. They get to still participate, and we stay in touch with them and make sure that they understand we're taking care of it. So.
Right. Matthew, I saw your head shaking. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, and that's definitely a practice we support and welcome is relationships, right? It takes everybody to steward these sites. We believe, from our project's mission that education, the more you know about a site and learn about it, leads to preservation. And so that is very key of how we, not only landowners, but neighbors, anybody as a global citizen is to think about, what it means to be a good steward. And it's about relationship, it's about education, and all of those things connected. And so I think this is a really good model of how we think about working with communities.
Great, thank you. I see two last questions, and I think I want to ask them together because I think that they do have some connection. The film and also your conversation has generated a lot of interest in the petroglyphs themselves. And so we're seeing questions coming in from our TikTok stream as well as from what's happening on Zoom. asking about cultural exchange, and are there connections that you see with images that we're finding at Mesa Prieta that maybe aren't typically found in the Tewa world, that maybe they're coming from somewhere else? Are there connections that way? And then there's another question that asks about individual petroglyphs and whether or not they stand alone or whether they're meant to be as part of a larger story, or, you know, the conversation with the broken Avanu and that piece. So I don't know, that's a lot to juggle. But do you want to take a stab at it, Matthew?
Yeah, I would say the imagery of petroglyphs, whether we call them, you know, rock art or petroglyphs, whatever the English term is they do not exist in isolation. There's always a connection to a context, to a landscape, to all ecological life. And, you know, we see that reflected in deer and birds, you know, turkey tracks. It's always in relationships. So you can't really separate imagery on the rocks without, you know, understanding this larger, beautiful Tewa landscape and traditions that it encompasses, for sure.
And something important to remember about Tewa life in pre-contact times is obviously you have Tewa pueblos that are tied together by common histories, common stories, common language. But the broader Tewa world, the world in which the Tewa participated, was massively expansive. You know, folks are getting macaws. Well, like, those macaws grow from, I mean, those macaws are born much further south, and yet they were a part of Tewa life. So that shows that that Tewa were personally interacting with folks from much farther afield. And so if we want to look at the extent of Tewa networks, well, that goes all the way out to the plains. That goes up into the Rockies. That goes west, possibly as far out as the coast. We see in ancestral Pueblo sites, we see shells from the Sea of Cortez and from the California coast. And of course, you have macaws, cacao, and other items coming up from Mesoamerica. And then we have New Mexico turquoise showing up down in Mesoamerica. So it's important to remember that the Tewa world, I mean, there's the core of it where the Tewa live, but then it's the world in which they play a part is massively expansive.
All right. Thank you, all three of you, for contributing to this great conversation. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm going to give you the last chance to say your last final piece. If you want to share anything else you want folks to know or to be aware of or to go visit later, I've dropped some links in the chat, and I will make sure that those go out in the email that we follow up with also.
I would just say, I would like to tell everybody to stay tuned, because we're probably going to be looking at other properties at Mesa Prieta. We've had there's some whisperings that we'll be looking at some other properties up there. So there's plenty more opportunities for us to preserve rock art up there. So if you're interested in helping us, just keep your eyes and ears open, and we'll be sharing information about fundraising and just, you know, how you can play a part in helping us save these petroglyphs.
And of course, the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. So Matthew, would you like to give a plug for some of the events we have coming up?
Yeah, so we're celebrating our 25th anniversary as a nonprofit. And it's really a reflection of all the work that has been done over the last 25 years. Our recording team, our docents and volunteers, you know, there's been some great archaeological finds. And, you know, obviously with the land and acquisition and some of the protection, it's a good year to celebrate where we're at as a historical time, but also think about where are we headed the next 25 years and beyond. And our mission is focused on education. We do have a series of talks and fundraising events planned for the year. Make sure and visit our website. In September, we have a 2-day symposium in collaboration with Northern New Mexico College to bring in some of our summer youth alumni, recorders, and anybody who's done work and visited the site to really just share their stories and reflect on this our project's histories. And it's much contributed to the legacy of Catherine Wells and her vision to really steward the project. And so Catherine is very much involved in the project and an elder and a wisdom, and we owe a lot to her steadfast determination.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking tonight. Participants, thank you for joining us tonight. If you have not had a chance to watch the film, yes, it's still available. Yes, it will still be available. It is on our YouTube channel, and you can find that real easily if you head to our Facebook page or if you Google Archaeological Conservancy and YouTube. I think that we also dropped the link in the chat. So please do go watch it. Please do share it with your friends and family. We want people to see it and to understand the importance and significance of Mesa Prieta and also why it's so important to preserve. Next week, if you're interested in hearing more from the Conservancy, we're going to have all 5 of our regional directors. So April, sorry, you're on the ticket again. But
People are going to get sick of me.
Well, we're going to hear more projects about what's going on across the country with preservation. And I think it will be a great conversation to see that we're going beyond Mesa Prieta. It's not just here, but it's across the country and the work that's being done. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Judith just typed in thanks for the Sketchfab link. So Chester, thank you for sharing that. We also had some other appreciations for including the Tewa perspective in this, Matthew. So thank you for that also. So with that, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next Thursday. Good night.